Republicans' vice presidential candidate, Indiana Governor Mike Pence, made Waukesha County his first solo appearance of the fall campaign, speaking at the Expo Center last week with Governor Scott Walker. The Trump-Pence ticket will need a big turnout in Wisconsin's WOW counties, Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington, if Trump is to have any hope of carrying the state come November. We're talking more about this and other topics today with Republican State Representative Dale Kwenga of Brookfield. Representative, good to have you back on the program.
Thanks for having me.
I guess for the record, we should establish whether or not you're a Trump supporter or a Trump agnostic or a never Trump guy. Where do you fall in that?
Yeah, I've always been more of a policy wonk than a political junkie, and especially with the military career going on, a business career, and 4 kids 8 and under. I'm kind of appreciating not jumping in the craziness of the presidential election. But I think both candidates have a long way to go to convince the majority of the state and the country that they're the candidate that is in the best interest of the country. So I'm really hoping that Trump on some of his views come more towards conservatism, more towards what we traditionally upheld in our party. And so I'm not a never Trumper, but I'm also holding out. I want to hear more of his message over the next 2-3 months.
It would be safe to call you persuadable, though. If he says things that you want to hear, you could support Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think both candidates have a long way to go as far as what their track records are and where they want to go with this country.
We saw in the primary, Ted Cruz won the WOW counties in a big way, beating Donald Trump handily. What does Trump need to do differently? Does he have to articulate more policy? Is that what the people in your community, your constituents, want to hear?
Yeah, I think pro-growth policies are the winner, right? We want to have pro-growth policies that really embrace the individual and actually support the family as well. And when we're talking about trade wars, trade wars should really concern places like Milwaukee. Milwaukee is a manufacturing community. We're a manufacturing state. And so when you see comments as far as trade wars, that's concerning. We need to make sure that our policies are pro-trade, right? Because that helps our community, and the consequences for Caterpillar and Joy Global, companies like that with a trade war would not be good.
Should Republicans be concerned about an enthusiasm gap in this November election?
I think both parties should be concerned about enthusiasm gap.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the Milwaukee Public Schools. You were one of the architects of this turnaround district. But right now, nothing much has changed. The commissioner of the turnaround district has decided, I don't want to do that anymore. He's left. Another one that still has to be appointed. There's no agreement on what the plan looks like. What's your reaction to it, and what's going to happen next in this discussion?
Well, Wisconsin has 435 school districts, and there's only one school district that's failing, one, and that's Milwaukee Public Schools. And here you have someone who is a Milwaukee Public School graduate who has a doctorate in education.
DeMond Means, the former commissioner.
Yep, former commissioner who has a doctorate in education, is the leader of one of the best public schools in the country. And most important, he cares. He's a man who cares. And he went in there to execute this plan to say, of these 53 failing schools in Milwaukee, some of those schools where not a single child could read. Let's try something different. And he was ran out of town by the status quo. And what I want to know is, when are people in Milwaukee hungry for change? When do they say the status quo is not acceptable? And I think that when DeMond was ran out of town, I think it was a moment in our state and our city where we said, okay, enough's enough. And so we're talking to stakeholders right now as far as where we're going to go from here. But Senator Darling and I are very committed to executing and doing something different for the kids in Milwaukee, 40% of them who are not even graduating high school.
You've said you want to go big. What do you mean by that? What's big? What do you want to do differently?
Yeah, I think, well, there's a trade-off, because what we did is we said it needs to be scalable too, right? So even those are 53 failing schools, we said, let's do something different for 3 to 5 of them a year, and over 10 years, we'll get to all 53 schools. Now, what's interesting is President Barack Obama, bipartisan support from Senator Baldwin and Senator Johnson, voted on the Every Child Succeeds Act. So what has changed since we passed that legislation is now the federal government is telling the state, you need to come up with an aggressive plan to deal with the 5% lowest performing schools in our state. So the majority of failing schools, 83% of them, are in Milwaukee and Wisconsin. And so really the federal government, in a bipartisan fashion, is telling us you need to have a greater sense of urgency to do something different. And so we need to go back to when we're back in session in January and come up with a plan that's more aggressive.
And Senator Fitzgerald, when he was on this show, the Senate Majority Leader, said there will be a move. Some people will want to give MPS less in the way of state funding. There could be talk about perhaps taking some power away from the school board. Are all those things on the table as far as you're concerned?
Everything's on the table.
Everything's on the table.
Everything's on the table.
Final question. Let's talk about the the battle over what we do about state roads. The governor is saying, I am not going to raise taxes or registration fees, but people in your party in the assembly, John Nygren and Robin Vos, say, we got to do something. Where is this going to end?
Yeah, so I think both parties have good points. I mean, we need to do something. Our transportation budget is not healthy. To get looking at about 20 cents on the dollar going towards bonding. That's not, you can't do that in the long term. But we also are a high tax state, so we shouldn't revert right away to tax increases. I mean, we were elected 6 years ago because we said Wisconsin's a high tax state. We think that the individual's priorities and the family priorities are not second to government priorities. And so we need to weigh that out because Wisconsin is still a high tax state. So I think that within the DOT budget, there's a lot of opportunities to look for cost savings. That's the first step. And then from there, we discuss if we need new revenue as well.
$1 billion shortfall. That'd have to be a lot of cost savings, wouldn't it?
That would be significant cost savings.
Dale Cuenca is a representative from Brookfield, Republican. Appreciate you having you on the show.
Thanks,
Good to be with. As the transportation money debate moves forward, our editorial partner, WisPolitics.com, will have that and other important state budget matters covered. Just check out the budget blog at WisPolitics.com. Coming up next on Upfront, the local races we're watching in next month's primary, including contests for district attorney in Milwaukee County and Dane County.